Captain Fritz. There's the prisoner.
There is Lee Oswald. He's been shot. He's been shot. Lee Oswald has been shot. There's the man with a gun. It's absolute panic. Absolute panic here in the basement of Dallas Police Headquarters. Detectives have their guns drawn. Oswald has been shot. There is no question about it. Oswald has been shot. As Oswald came out, he was asked, did you shoot the president or something along those lines? And at that hour, at that moment, at that instant, sometime about 11:15 in Dallas, someone walked up to Oswald. At point-blank range, fired into his stomach. An ambulance now is coming here. This will be the ambulance to take Lee Oswald to wherever he will receive medical treatment. It is almost unbelievable. It's almost unbelievable. This is the back end of the ambulance.
If you can get back further. If you can get back further. As far as I know, no.
Do you have the man who fired?
We have a man, yes. I didn't hear you.
The back of the ambulance has been opened. Police and detectives are now standing cordoned off. Here comes a squad car driving in from the north side of the Dallas Police basement. Yes, you have one man, do you not,
yes,
Captain?
Yes, I didn't see it, so we've got the man I think did it.
Here he comes. Here's Oswald again. He is now lying very pale on the stretcher. He's being put into the ambulance, head first. There's a group of detectives around the rear end of the ambulance. Now they have the problem that the ambulance is blocked by the armored car out on Commerce Street. The armored car, which was to take Lee Oswald to Dallas County Jail, now is blocking the exit of the ambulance, which is to take him to a hospital. Captain, where will he be taken? Captain, where will he be taken?
I'm assuming Parkland Hospital.
Parkland Hospital, the irony of ironies, the place where President John F. Kennedy died. The ambulance is leaving Dallas Police Headquarters. Dallas Police say they do have a man.
Mr. Oswald is still alive and has been placed on a pacemaker. A pacemaker is an electronic instrument which sends electrical impulses into the heart, which causes the heart muscles to expand and to contract and restores the normal rhythm of the heart. We had the administrator called me and advised me that he understood that there was quite a crowd gathered downtown in anticipation of the transfer. And on the basis of this knowledge, we called our emergency room and alerted them, since we thought that there might possibly be some type of disorder, and we wanted to be prepared. The chief of surgery at Parkland Memorial Hospital and Southwestern Medical School is coming into the room now to make a statement on Mr. Oswald.
Talk a little louder, Doctor.
Doctor, you alive, Doctor? Let Dr. Sires make his statement, please.
When did he die, Doctor?
Who's comes out here? Yeah, here you go. You like to ask questions? Oswald died at 1:07 our time in the operating room of the gunshot wounds that he received.
Would you describe his last moments on the operating table, please?
The last moments were rather hectic. He had a cardiac arrest from all the massive blood loss, massive injuries. The last few minutes were spent in cardiac resuscitation, open heart massage, electrical defibrillation, internal defibrillation, and finally there were absolutely no signs of life at all.
Madness and hate erupt anew in Dallas as President Kennedy's accused assassin is shot down himself during a jail transfer. There's an ominous symbol in Lee Harvey Oswald's murder weapon as he is taken to the city jail basement where an armored car is to move him to a maximum security cell. Oswald walks his last mile. His assailant moves in from the right.
There is Lee Oswald. He's been shot. He's been shot. Lee Oswald has been shot.
Now, from another camera, the motion is slowed. The murderer moves in, and here is the shame of all America as Jack Rubenstein takes the law unto himself. The dying Oswald is rushed to the same hospital where President Kennedy died. Doctors work to save his life. But 48 hours and 7 minutes after the president's death, his accused slayer is dead. The sound of the muffled drum sweeps in melancholy waves over the hushed throng. A hush broken only by a stifled sob, a murmured prayer. A whole people is lifted up in common sorrow and ennobled in their hearts. Down this avenue of sadness, they bring President John F. Kennedy, martyred hero, to lie in state under the great dome of the Capitol. Mrs. Kennedy begins the long hours of her public grief with the courageous dignity that has marked each moment of her ordeal. Caroline and John seem to mirror their mother's poise. With President Johnson and Robert Kennedy, she is in the van of the mourners who will pay their respects in the historic rotunda of the Capitol. President Johnson represents a sorrowing people as he places a wreath marked "From President Johnson and the Nation." Mrs. Kennedy comes forward with Caroline in a tableau that calls for no words. Its poignancy calls only for tears. Bearing the burden of their own sorrow, 250,000 people braved near freezing weather to pass by the dead president in tribute. Some waited for as long as 12 hours in a line that at times stretched for 10 miles. The old, the young, the aged, the children. They became one in their grief, in the spontaneous outpouring that throws up an enduring memorial to the American spirit. And so they kept their vigil through the long and lonely night, each man a tiny island of sadness, buffeted by the seas of unhappy fate. The next day, the body is borne to St. Matthew's Cathedral, with Mrs. Kennedy and the President's family walking in humble prayer behind the caisson. Not since the funeral of Britain's King Edward VII in 1910 has there been such a gathering of kings and queens, presidents and premiers. 220 dignitaries from 92 foreign lands honor the warrior who died while fighting for peace and liberty and the dignity of man. Erect and proud, Mrs. Kennedy walks the 6 long blocks with firm step yet tearful eye. At the cathedral, a pontifical funeral mass is to be said for the repose of the soul of the first Roman Catholic president, a devout man from a devout family, who today find deep solace in the solemn rites of their church. As the distinguished mourners gather in St. Matthew's, peoples of all faiths around the world join them in prayers. Mass is read in Moscow, Buddhists pray in South Vietnam, Shinto priests conduct services in Tokyo, a rabbi exhorts God in Israel. The foreign dignitaries move unobtrusively to their pews. They attach little importance to their own identities today. Joining the humble in the 4 corners of the earth, they pray, each in his own way, that the soaring spirit that was President Kennedy in life may find eternal rest in death. The strains of the Ave Maria reach out like a caress. Mrs. Kennedy requested it. The Ave Maria was sung at her wedding. After the sacrifice of the Mass, there are prayers aloud in the tongues of all faiths. Then will come the solemn moment when the incense is tossed on hot coals and Cardinal Cushing, an old family friend, blesses the mortal remains of John F. Kennedy. From St. Matthew's, the cortege is to cross the Potomac to the Cemetery of Heroes, Arlington. As the casket is returned to the caisson, there comes a family vignette that must take its place with those memories we hold warm and dear. A gentle reminder from his mother, and John celebrates his 3rd birthday with a soldier's farewell to his father.
The Dallas County Grand Jury met this morning at 8:30, heard evidence against Jack Rubenstein, alias Jack Ruby, for the murder of Lee Oswald. He was indicted. The indictment's returned to Judge Joe B. Brown's court. It's been set down for a hearing on December the 9th. This is a most aggravated killing, an assassination, the case in which we will ask the death penalty and think that's the only proper punishment.
15 years?
In my opinion, based on the evidence as I know it now, Jack Ruby should go free, based on his mental condition as it was at the time I talked to him shortly after the shooting.
Does this indicate that you will enter a plea of temporary insanity?
Well, I don't want to say yes or no, but certainly that's under consideration. I talked to him quite at length. Let's get it over here where I can get my back to the wall here. Yeah, let's get where everybody can. All right, I will. Yes, I talked to him for quite a long time. He was still in a very excited mood. He had calmed down somewhat from when I saw him yesterday in the city jail. He was still in a very emotional, nervous state. He was able to discuss some of the events leading up to the fatal shooting. I got an impression from him that he had been terribly upset by the president's death and that he had brooded over it from the time he first learned of it until the time of the shooting of Oswald. I can say to you now that I questioned him about whether or not he had ever known Oswald before. He said the first time that he had ever seen Oswald in his life was in the assembly room at the police department on Friday night. He said, and I wrote this down as he said it. All right. He said, Ruby said, I saw Oswald for the first time at the police station in the assembly room the night he killed President Kennedy. Oswald was smirky and so cocky. He acted like he was so proud of what he had done. I could not get it out of my mind that the communists had sent Oswald to kill our president. I kept thinking how Jackie was suffering and that Carolyn and John didn't have a daddy. I kept thinking about a letter I read in the paper to Carolyn. That's all he said. All right, I'll read it slowly. Jack told me this.
Did he tell you how he got into the basement yesterday?
I understand from what he told me that he had walked in only a few moments before Oswald was brought out. He said that he had left home and driven by the place of President Kennedy's assassination and that he had seen the Rees, that he had been by there several times.
Was he challenged by any police officers in the basement?
That I cannot say. I didn't question him about that.
Can you tell us whether he had a press card with him or not?
I didn't ask him about
Did
that.
he say he would do it again, or was he sorry that he did it? Did he give any indication about it?
He seemed so upset that I didn't discuss that with him.
Which entrance did he go into the basement? Did he tell you that?
Said he walked in on the Main Street side.
Did he say that he had planned to kill the president before he left the town? I mean, to kill, I'm sorry. He had planned to kill Oswald before he left the house?
No, sir.
When did he say he got the idea? Why
He's-
would he have the gun at the time?
He said that he, let's have the one question at a time here I'm trying to answer. Trying to answer this gentleman's question over here. He said to me that he became almost... Yes, he did. He mentioned that he had seen a large crowd around the courthouse. And as he went by to see the wreaths again.
So he was aware that Oswald had not yet been transferred.
I don't know whether he was or not. I don't know whether he knew what the crowd was waiting on.
Mr. Howard, do you intend...
He said that he did as he passed by the City Hall Main Street ramp. He could see down into the basement, and he saw the excitement going on down there, and he parked his car on a parking lot.
Mr. Howard, do you intend to personally represent him at his trial?
I feel sure that I will. He said that he wanted me to.
Is Mr. Bruner and Mr. Doherty still representing him?
You'll have to discuss that with them.
Mr. Howard, from your investigation so far, have you formed any preliminary plans of the type of defense you'll use?
I don't think there's any question but what, at the time of this shooting, that Jack Ruby was completely out of his mind.
Do you personally want to represent him at the trial?
I'll be glad to represent him if he wants me to.
What's your next step?
Well, my next step is to go over my notes, and I'll probably talk to him again later tonight or in the morning.
When will his first appearance in a courtroom be?
At the examining trial or at the habeas corpus hearing. I discussed that with him. I don't know whether he completely understands what an examining trial or a habeas corpus hearing is, but in any event, I did my best to explain that to him and suggested to him that it might be better that we wait till the grand jury acts on the case before having a hearing.
Do you know how soon that will be?
I would imagine it'd either be by Wednesday or by the following Wednesday.
Has the writ of habeas corpus expired?
I'll explain it to you this way. A preliminary writ of habeas corpus is an order by the court directing the officers to produce the defendant in court and show cause why he's being held. Now, the officers, in response to that writ, file the charges against him. So that makes the writ what lawyers call moot. In other words, it means that that's over, that they've done what the officers have done what they're supposed to.
So we wait for the preliminary hearing.
And then it's up to us whether or not we ask for an examining trial, what's sometimes called a preliminary hearing, or whether we wait for the grand jury action and have a habeas corpus hearing in the district court.
What further can you tell us from your notes there from the conversation?
Well, let me look them over here a minute. He said that he... Just 1 second.
What's up crying and breaking up?
Well, these are just my notes that at the time that he passed by there, that he was crying, that he had been crying. Those are...
To the police interpretation of the event.
No, I think it's pretty hard to believe the Dallas Police Department. I haven't been able to believe much that came out of the Dallas Police Department after Ruby killed Oswald that Sunday morning. I don't see how it's possible for the most important prisoner in our history to be killed and murdered in the jail while tied to a policeman with 70 other policemen standing around. and then learned that the killer is nothing but a police pimp. The newspaper certainly did not state that she had an autopsy in the report of her death. But she gave some of the most amazing testimony in the entire 26 volumes, and I know of no newsman in the world that ever talked to that lady after she gave that testimony, and she was not thoroughly questioned by the commission attorneys. For example, she told that a police car stopped in front of the Oswald rooming house while Oswald was in the room after the killing of the president. And she said the car made 2 short beeps on the horn, and when she went to the door to see who it was, the car drove away. Now, she named who the 2 officers were, who she thought they were, Alexander and George Burnley, and the commission didn't even ask her the first name of Officer Alexander. And then they missed, and neither of those men were ever called to question.
Now, the cause of death was listed as acute myocardial infarction. Do you subscribe to that, or do you not?
I don't know. I have not been able to find out or get a copy of the autopsy report. I don't know that there was an autopsy report in her death. I simply think that I know that the Dallas Police Department hung a driving while intoxicated charge on her after she gave her testimony. And I doubt very much if a lady suffering from acute diabetes was drunk while driving a car. Maybe she was, but at least it gives the police department a handle to make her cooperate with them and hide from newsmen who were searching for her. I searched for that lady at least 2 months before her death.
In the experiment, police marksmen will be trying to recapture the sounds that took place November 22nd, 1963, when John Kennedy was fatally shot during a motorcade down Elm Street. Pictures and films of the event have been studied and restudied time and again, and recreated time and again. For example, this was the scene from an effort by movie makers last year to recreate the events of that day, and those who saw the real thing said the staged event was so realistic it was almost scary. But this is the first concentrated effort to analyze the sounds of the gunfire. The Warren Commission in 1964 determined that Kennedy was killed by a single gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald, who fired 3 shots from the 6th floor of the old schoolbook depository building on Elm. But a tape recording is turned up which the House Assassinations Committee says could be interpreted to indicate that there actually were 4 shots fired. The committee is in charge of tomorrow's tests. Sharpshooters will fire live ammunition into sandbags, and a recording of the sounds will be analyzed to determine if the original tape reveals extra gunshots or just echoes. A Boston firm, the same group which analyzed the 18-minute gap in the Nixon tapes, will analyze tomorrow's recording. Barricades already are in place near Dealey Plaza downtown. Tomorrow morning, the area will be sealed off to keep traffic and other noise to a minimum. In fact, police have asked for cooperation from the FAA and many other agencies to try to keep noise to a minimum for 4 hours. Even with all the expensive and painstaking efforts being made toward tomorrow's experiment, investigators and assassination committee members admit the chances that the test will contribute significantly to the investigation are remote. Joe Stroop, the Texas News.
From the moment the presidential motorcade began its winding journey through downtown Dallas in 1963, and shots rang out just before President Kennedy's car reached the triple overpass, Dealey Plaza has been the object of repeated scrutiny. The reenactment of part of the assassination scene planned for this weekend is not the first time such a recreation has been made. Last year, the motorcade was recreated for a made-for-television motion picture, and observers who had been here in 1963 said the make-believe was frighteningly convincing. This Sunday, when investigators from the House Assassination Subcommittee restaged the gunfire of November 22, 1963, the scene in Dealey Plaza will be noticeably different. The public will be banned from the area, and news cameras restricted to certain areas. Every effort will be made to keep extraneous noise to a minimum so the investigators can clearly record the sounds of the gunfire as sharpshooters fire from the same 6th floor window where the Warren Commission said Lee Harvey Oswald took aim and fired. The sounds recorded Sunday will be compared with the police tape recording made on the day of the assassination, which some people say indicates 4 shots instead of 3 were fired. In the midst of all the highly publicized preparations for this event, an important question has almost been overlooked. Will these tests reveal anything conclusive or even significant? Investigators and members of the committee admit the chances are remote. Doug Adams, the Texas News.
This is where it all happened, November 22nd, 1963. People from around the world come to stand on this corner. They look up to see the window where it's believed Lee Harvey Oswald took aim at President Kennedy. And some people wonder, what's up there now? That question is intriguing journalists, too. This television crew is here from Australia for a rare look inside the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. This building was bought and partially renovated for Dallas County offices. But the top 3 floors are much like they were 20 years ago.
Oh, boy, this is a walk-up.
This is not open to the public. In fact, the 6th floor is locked. The Dallas County Historical Foundation has the key. Scholars are sometimes allowed up here, but lately journalists from Japan, Sweden, England, Denmark, and all over the United States have come here to take pictures and to look out the window that's now known as the Sniper's Perch.
The assassin merely aimed his rifle out the window, waited till he had Kennedy in his sights, then pull the trigger.
I think it's not only of interest to people in Australia, Jane. I think it's of interest to people all over the world, not just in the United States the president was loved.
The mystery surrounding the Kennedy assassination has only grown more intense as years have gone by. People want to know exactly what happened here that day in November, and we probably never will. Jane Boone in Dallas for NBC News.
The latest incident didn't directly involve the Oswald grave, but the cemetery's general manager blames his latest problem on Oswald.
During the night, a burglar or burglars, police think they were teenage amateurs, broke into 2 buildings. They took small hand tools and the like from the maintenance building. And at the office, much the same story. In addition, desks ransacked, files rifled. Outside, below a window, letters were scratched in the dirt. They're hard to make out, but look like It's Alive, the title from a horror movie a couple of years ago. Cemetery General Manager Neil Retberg says all totaled his loss and damage will run $5,000 to $10,000 this time. Retberg sees no direct link with Oswald being buried at Rose Hill, but because he is, the cemetery has a certain notoriety, making it a high visibility target for thieves and vandals over the years.
I have really had it. I have been burned out by fire. I've had arsons in my trees back here, the property damage out here. I want the public to be aware that we have been subjected to this kind of harassment. And I'm asking for their cooperation to help put this to an end.
Bill Hicks, Channel 5 Action News.
With the situations down here.
Charles Eddowes says the man in this grave is not Lee Harvey Oswald, but a Russian imposter who killed the president. Eddowes says the real Lee Harvey Oswald disappeared or was done away with after he arrived in Russia. The man who went to the U.S. Embassy, who met Marina and returned to America with her, the man Jack Ruby shot, was a Russian agent using the name Alec James Hedel, says Eddowes. The British journalist says 7 differences recorded on Marine physicals and the assassin's autopsy support his theory. The Marine who left for Russia was 5'11". The man who came back stood 5'9". Oswald had a scar behind his left ear from surgery. The meticulous autopsy, which recorded even small scratches on the assassin's body, did not mention that scar. Eddowes says Oswald's mother and other relatives are now suspicious because they noticed differences in his hair and skin color.
6. He referred to his half-brother, who he met once, as, "Oh, this is my half-brother," never previously having mentioned half-brother before when they were living together for many years.
How could he keep that secret from his relatives if it wasn't the real man? How wouldn't they have known it?
He didn't answer their questions. They had no reason to believe he wasn't the real man. They'd received dozens of photographs from the Soviet Union, photographs of the assassin with Marina and baby. And of course, the man who turned up at Luffield Airport looked like the man in the photographs.
The major conflict with Eddowes' theory is the fingerprints. He says the way they were handled leaves room for doubt.
4 sets of fingerprints were shown in the Warren Report exhibits. Each one of those sets there's something wrong with. It's the most appalling submission of fingerprint evidence I've ever known. The head of the fingerprint department, Sebastian Latona of the FBI, testified to the Warren Commission. When asked if Oswald had been fingerprinted the Marines, he said, "I believe so." Did he sign the card? Offhand, I don't know. Did you examine them? Oh, yes. Are they the same as the Dallas prints? Yes. Have you got the fingerprint card from the Marines with you? No, I haven't got it. Will you let us have it later? Yes, I will. It appears in the exhibits. Was the assassin ever fingerprinted after he entered the United States from Russia? The donor said yes, of course, in connection with the offense in Dallas. Yes, but apart from that, not that I know of. But the assassin was fingerprinted in New Orleans when he was arrested by the New Orleans police in August 1963. And yet the senior man testifying about the assassination of a president didn't even know of the existence of the New Orleans fingerprints. A very good thing he didn't, because the signature on the New Orleans fingerprint card is entirely different from the signature on the Marine card and on the Dallas card.
Eddowes has asked the House Assassinations Committee to dig up the grave that contains the assassin's body to compare the teeth with Marine reports. He also made several trips to Fort Worth to talk with the Tarrant County District Attorney and medical examiner. Both men say the theory is interesting and raises some doubts, but they aren't convinced exhuming the body will prove anything.
He's been shot. He's been shot.
An obviously disappointed Eddowes said he's amazed someone had to come from England to tell Americans they didn't kill their president. He says the FBI, the CIA, and the State Department had to know the assassin was a Russian imposter because he developed his theory from their records. They covered it up, he says, because they knew they'd been conned. Karen Parfit, the Texas News.
This is the most infamous landmark in Dallas, the Texas School Book Depository. Or is it? The building which made history is an antiquated red brick structure. It looks nothing like this place. But yet, there's a name on this building. Totally confused? So are many other people. To straighten things out, this is the old School Book Depository. Lee Harvey Oswald fatally shot President John F. Kennedy from here in 1964. And this is the new Texas School Book Depository, a live and thriving private book warehouse near the Market Center. The company moved here 10 years ago and has new owners. They've inherited the famous name and the confusion that goes with it.
We had brought an engineer from Houston to Dallas to do an engineer's report on this building when we bought the business. And he came to Dallas to go to the Texas School Book Depository and went to the wrong building and tried to do the inspection down there and then flew back to Houston, so we had to bring him back to Dallas.
While the owners say some of the mistakes are humorous, they are often annoyed by other remarks.
We had a waitress who had accepted one of my company credit cards and made some comment about, do you rent the building out for assassinations? And I explained to her that I thought that was in rather poor taste.
Despite the bad connection between the building and the business, Strickland and Curley are not changing the name. They say the people who count, the people who do work with their company, continue to do so because they know the difference. Victor Solis, Channel 5 Action News, Dallas.
While there's no disputing the fact the Texas Book Depository is certainly the most infamous landmark in Dallas history, and county commissioners generally support the idea of a museum here, they question whether in a year when taxes are going up all the way around, whether taxpayers will find this a luxury or a necessity.
And I think the taxpayers are going to be looking at necessities. When you start hitting pocketbooks, I think they're not going to want too many frills next year, so we're going to have to be very careful. And based on that, I couldn't commit to this or anything like this right now.
It was here on the 6th floor of the Texas Book Depository where Lee Harvey Oswald fired the shots that killed presidents. The 6th floor set aside for a museum with its own private elevator.
It will be an educational display, and it will be one that is done with great restraint, and it will show the various investigations of the assassination and what they have proven.
Mrs. Adams was hoping county commissioners would allocate $75,000 for the project. Most of the rest of the $900,000 would come from private donations. But in a year when city, school, and county property taxes are all going up, commissioners indicated they are not likely to use public funds for any new museum, no matter how worthy. Bob Letter, Channel 5 Action News, Dallas.
There is a theory that an imposter killed John F. Kennedy and was later buried in this Fort Worth cemetery. Dallas County medical examiners have obtained Oswald's military dental x-rays from St. Louis. They say they should be matched with the body in the cemetery. Tarrant County's medical examiner is worried about his legal liability. He says he'll only allow the grave to be...
I'm at Martell at the DFW airport. This is the man who started it all, British author Michael Eddowes. He, more than anyone, wants Oswald's body dug up. Back in 1963, he turned up information that the Russians were interested in discrediting President John Kennedy. He says when that didn't work, the Russians decided to get tough. When Kennedy was assassinated, Eddowes started his 16-year investigation into how it happened. That resulted in this book, The Oswald File, in which he claims that the man who shot Kennedy was not Lee Harvey Oswald. Eddowes claims it was really a trained Russian agent named Alec Heidel. If it sounds improbable, it just might be. But Eddowes said it was just part of a startling Russian plot.
He dug up with a court order and a good explanation of the evidence at hand.
I'm quite certain that fingerprints must have been taken of the deceased. There must have been a comparison study done. I would like to know why they are negating all that at this particular time. Okay, what proof they have that something was wrong in that particular investigation way back in 63?
In 63, the prints did match those that were said to be Oswald's, but the Dallas authorities say any scientific evidence can be argued away. In fact, if the teeth don't match, it will create even more questions.
It could mean anything from the fact that the x-rays got scrambled in St. Louis all the way up to there being some kind of far-reaching subterfuge, and I don't think that's the kind of judgment that we would make at all. At the time we make the comparison and either confirm or deny, our job is finished. Our scientific and professional obligation is finished at that point.
For now, the examiners say they'll play a waiting game to see if they get to put their x-rays to the test. Charles Ely, Channel 5 Action News, Fort Worth.
We now know that Khrushchev approved a plan, a KGB plan, to murder Nixon if he was elected president in 1960. That is fact and can be confirmed from the CIA. When Kennedy was elected, instead of assassinating Kennedy, they thought they could destroy his character by sexual compromise through Marina Novotny.
Eddowes speculates that the real Oswald was kept in a Russian prison until after the assassination. Then he was killed. Some say it's a tall tale that he's trying to sell to Tarrant County authorities.
I'm not a man of pressure, but I think that the Tarrant County authorities should reconsider their decision.
Eddowes says he's not here to nudge or push Tarrant County officials into exhuming the body of Lee Harvey Oswald, but by the same token, he didn't come all this way just to come to Dallas-Fort Worth, turn around and go home. But some people are questioning Michael Eddowes' motives. After all, he is an author, and helping to stir up a controversy like this one could just boost his book sales, something that Michael Eddowes certainly wouldn't be against. At Martell, Channel 5 Action News, Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. The other question, the focus of today's hearing, was whether British author Michael Eddowes had a right to request that the body be dug up. The DA's office and the district court both said no to Eddowes' first request. He is convinced that the Soviet agent is buried in Oswald's grave. In an hour of presentation, Eddowes' lawyer John Collins argued that because of his information, Eddowes had every right to make his request, and that the county was bound by the state code to exhume the body. The county argued that Eddowes hadn't proven why Tarrant County should become involved in the matter. While all this was going on, Oswald's mother, Marguerite Oswald, sat quietly in the back of the courtroom. I asked if she intended to sue the county if her son's body were dug up.
I'm not going to comment on that type of question because it's mere speculation. I'm here because this is legal and a court proceeding. And then we will wait and see what the court decides, and then I think I'll enter the case. But until then, I don't know what's going to happen, so don't expect me to answer these type questions.
The three justices heard the hour-long arguments and then adjourned the hearing. Eddowes' lawyer figures that no matter what the decision, it's not the end of the appeals.
Quite likely we'll go to the Texas Supreme Court. I suspect the losing party here will take it there, ultimately.
Is it the grave of Lee Harvey Oswald, or is it the grave of somebody else? Whether or not it gets dug up is now up to the three justices of the Civil Appeals Court. They expect to have a ruling within 2 weeks. Ed Martell, Channel 5 Action News, Fort Worth.
November 25, 1963, the day our nation buried President John F. Kennedy, the same day it buried accused assassin Lee Harvey Oswald, and plans to bury the truth about both were already well underway.
What we're about to show you for the first time anywhere is that the honorable men who sat here in Washington as members of the Warren Commission unwittingly got caught up in a cover-up. We've obtained secret documents the Warren Commission thought it had destroyed. Secret documents that show, in the words of the Warren Commission members themselves, their shock when they discovered their own investigation had been fixed, that the story had already been decided for them before they held even one public hearing.
They began with the preconception of a lone assassin. They did not investigate the crime. They never intended to investigate the crime.
For years, former Senate investigator Harold Weisberg tried to pry that alleged fact out of the official Warren Commission files. But deep in the National Archives, a January 22, 1964 executive session transcript that Weisberg believed contained proof of the stifled investigation was missing. Until he discovered this billing statement from the commission stenographer. It showed the court reporter did sit in on the meeting, and that led to this box in the archives containing the steno notes, which have now been transcribed for the first time. This once-destroyed transcript proves the Warren Commission knew it had been had. Meeting late in the afternoon, Senator Richard Russell said, "The FBI is very explicit that Oswald is the assassin or was the assassin, and that they are very explicit that there was no conspiracy. Secondly, they have not run out all kinds of leads in Mexico or in Russia, but they're concluding that there can't be a conspiracy without those being run out." When the Chief Justice and I were just briefly reflecting on this, we said that if this was true and it ever came out, then you would have people think there was a conspiracy to accomplish this assassination. "You are so right," said Congressman Hale Boggs. "Oh, terrible," said Alan Dulles. "Implications of this are fantastic, don't you think so?" says Boggs. "Terrific," says Senator Russell.
The Warren Commission was under a lot of pressure to convince the public and the world that it was not a conspiracy.
Pressure that came from this FBI report completed just hours after the assassination. As we showed you last night, a letter written just 3 days after the assassination from then Deputy Attorney General Nicholas Katzenbach to President Johnson's press secretary Bill Moyers said the FBI report could be used to convince the public Oswald was the assassin.
They were terrified. They were scared. They knew they were boxed in. They knew that the FBI had leaked what they did not dare go against.
And the transcript again offers proof. Senator Russell says the FBI would like to have us fold up and quit. This closes the case, you see. Don't you see, says Representative Boggs. Yes, I see that, says Dulles. Chief Counsel Lee Rankin says they found the man. There is nothing more to do. The commission supports their conclusions and we can go home, and that's the end of it. Boggs, I don't even like to see this being taken down. And Dulles agrees. Yes, I think this record should be destroyed.
There's the producer. There is Lee Oswald. He's been shot. He's been shot.
Jack Ruby effectively silenced Lee Harvey Oswald with a single shot to the chest, but the televised murder failed to silence the shouts of conspiracy, which continue to this day. The grave of the accused presidential assassin is marked by a simple granite stone at Rose Hill Cemetery in East Fort Worth. And if a British author has his way, that grave will be disturbed, the body removed and re-examined. The author is 75-year-old Michael Eddowes, who has written a book called The Oswald File. Eddowes claims exhumation is required because that body buried at Rose Hill is not Oswald.
It is a Soviet citizen, the identity of whom we shall never know. A look-alike for Lee Harvey Oswald.
Eddowes says Oswald never left the Soviet Union, and that the autopsy performed on his imposter showed substantial differences between Oswald's medical records and the Marine Corps. Eddowes has requested the Tarrant County District Attorney's Office to exhume the Rose Hill grave, but that request was denied. And today, the DA filed a summary judgment motion with District Judge James Wright, asking that the attempt to exhume the body be refused. Wright said he'll probably make a ruling on the motion early next month. Jack Brown, the Texas News.
British author Michael Eddowes is pushing for the exhumation and autopsy to prove his theory the body in Oswald's grave may be that of a Russian agent. Oswald's brother Robert filed suit to halt Eddowes, and this morning Judge Wright granted Robert Oswald a temporary injunction to stop the exhumation. He said he could find no necessity or compelling reason for the threatened exhumation and autopsy, and rumors, theory, and curiosity are not enough. Robert Oswald's attorney, Craig Fowler, read the 7-page order with obvious satisfaction. Fowler contends the question of Oswald's identity was settled in 1963.
All three tests conclusively showed that this was the same man that was in the Marine Corps, that grew up here in the Texas area, went to Russia and returned. There isn't any question about who it was.
Fowler admits the judge's ruling doesn't end the legalities. That still to come is a full hearing for a permanent injunction against Eddowes.
But the law is not going to change, and really the facts aren't going to change. And it would just simply be a rehash of what has already been done.
No date for the hearing on a permanent injunction has been set. Bill Hicks, Channel 5 Action News, Fort Worth.
First, there were reports that the exhumation would take place sometime tomorrow. Now it may not happen at all because Robert Oswald, brother of Lee
Harvey Oswald died in 1963, 2 days after he allegedly shot and killed the president.
Harvey Oswald filed suit against British author Michael Eddowes. Eddowes has been trying for some time to have the Oswald body exhumed. At the request of Robert Oswald and his attorneys, late this afternoon, a state district judge granted a temporary restraining order holding up that exhumation. This is Paul Grody. 17 years ago, he embalmed the body believed to be Lee Harvey Oswald. He does now, as he did then, believe that that body is, in fact, Lee Harvey Oswald. Grody met with Robert Oswald today, telling him that the exhumation might be the only way to put this whole issue to rest.
If he were to have this done and were to allow it to proceed, that he can have his mind relieved that it is truly Lee Harvey. And it would be a relief to the family as well as to all concerned that we can establish the facts that are at hand. Is it really Lee? And knowing then the public can be convinced that it is Lee also and would take it from there.
But still, Robert Oswald will meet tomorrow with his attorneys to prepare to take this issue to court. Paula Drew, Channel 5 Action News, Fort Worth.
This was the scene when Oswald was shot.
He's been shot. He's been shot. Lee Oswald has been shot. There's the man with a gun. It's absolute panic.
Oswald was buried at Rose Hill Cemetery in Fort Worth, but the controversy surrounding him has never been laid to rest. One man has already tried and failed to get a court order to have the Oswald grave opened, believing the body of a Soviet imposter would be found. Now Oswald's widow, Marina, is asking that the grave be opened. Today, her attorney filed a lawsuit that states Marina Porter Oswald doesn't believe the body is in the grave. According to her suit, Mrs. Porter believes the body has been illegally removed and secretly hidden or cremated.
Is there new evidence that would indicate the body has been removed from the grave?
There is new evidence, but I can't make any further comment on it at this time.
If there is a body in this grave, Marina Porter is asking the court to allow another autopsy. Her attorney has already won access to Oswald's old dental records, so a comparison could be made. But Marina Porter is confronting a big legal stumbling block, the objection of Lee Harvey Oswald's brother, who has already blocked one attempt to have the body exhumed. His attorney says Robert Oswald doesn't believe there's any good reason to open his brother's grave. But Marina Oswald Porter believes there's one very good reason, to put all the controversy to rest. Leah Keith, Channel 5 Action News. Robert Oswald is trying to legally tie the hands of his brother's widow. For the time being, he has succeeded. Today, Judge James Wright granted a temporary restraining order that means the Oswald grave remains closed for now.
The TRO, or temporary restraining order, is an order that's good for only 10 days, and we intend to abide by that court order for 10 days until we have a hearing on October 5th.
Marina Porter's attorneys plan to fight back October 5th when Robert Oswald tries to make the court order more permanent. Mrs. Porter has one thing going for her, a Fort Worth appeals court ruling that says her rights take a front seat to Robert's when it comes to opening this grave. Will it ever come to that? His attorney says Robert Oswald concedes that Marina Porter has a right to share in that decision.
All Robert wants is that it be done according to proper legal precedent and in an orderly, respectful way.
So it's beginning to sound like what was done here at Rose Hill Burial Park 18 years ago will be undone, sooner or later. As far as Marina Porter is concerned, the sooner, the better. Leah Keith, Channel 5 Action News.
Judge James Wright asked the attorneys to submit written arguments or briefs within a week. British author Michael Eddowes contends a Russian agent may be buried in Oswald's grave, and the only way to prove him right or wrong is to exhume the body and do an autopsy. Dr. Linda Norton of the Dallas County Medical Examiner's Office says there'd be no difficulty making positive identification if the body were exhumed. Last Friday, Oswald's widow, Marina, asked the court to order the grave opened because she had heard his body is no longer in the grave. But Oswald's brother, Robert, says he's convinced it's Lee's body, and he's vehemently opposed to any exhumation because of the mental anguish it would cause him. The question of who owns the gravesite apparently will be a critical one to the case. Robert says he does. Eddowes' attorneys say it was bought by Lee Harvey's mother, Marguerite, in 1961. I talked to Marguerite Oswald by telephone this afternoon. She declined to say whether she had purchased the cemetery plot in 1961. Robert Oswald's attorney, Craig Fowler, says if any cemetery records indicate that, it probably was a case of the purchase date being backdated, so the cemetery could avoid criticism for accepting the body of an accused presidential assassin. Bill Hicks, Channel 5 Action News, Fort Worth.
I didn't shoot anybody, sir.
He died in 1963.
He's been shot. He's been shot.
But 17 years later, the controversy surrounding Lee Harvey Oswald is very much alive. One man has already tried and failed to open Oswald's grave in hopes of proving a Soviet imposter is buried here. Now Oswald's widow is trying. Her attorney has filed a lawsuit that states Marina Oswald Porter believes her dead husband's body has been illegally removed and secretly hidden or cremated.
Is there new evidence that would indicate the body has been removed from the grave?
There is new evidence, but I can't make any further comment on it.
But getting the court's permission to open the grave isn't going to be easy because Oswald's brother Robert is opposed to the exhumation, and his attorneys say Robert Oswald will not allow his brother's grave to be disturbed. Leah Keith, Channel 5 Action News.
British author Michael Eddowes says only by exhuming the body in Lee Harvey Oswald's grave can it ever be proven whether it is Oswald buried there or, as Eddowes contends, a Russian agent. Oswald's brother Robert claims he owns the cemetery plot and has filed suit to stop the exhumation. Friday, Lee Harvey Oswald's widow Marina testified she strongly believes there's a possibility no body is in the grave. WBAP Radio News Director Bob Berry, the only civilian at the funeral home that day 17 years ago, believes there is.
And then just before the body was put on the hearse, the casket was closed, and Sheriff Evans asked that it be opened to make sure that the man who'd been in there originally was still in there. So they opened up the coffin. And the person we all think is Lee Harvey Oswald was there. They then sealed the coffin, put it on the hearse, and drove immediately to Rose Hill Cemetery. And the body was buried.
Ownership of the cemetery plot is a key issue in the case. Eddowes' attorneys say Rose Hill Cemetery records show Marguerite Oswald bought the gravesite in 1961. Robert Oswald's lawyer, Craig Fowler, says only one document indicates that, and he believes it was backdated on purpose, so the cemetery wouldn't be criticized for accepting the body of an accused presidential assassin. I talked to Marguerite Oswald by telephone this afternoon. She declined to say whether she had purchased the cemetery plot in 1961. She also declined to say whether she now favors exhumation of the body in her son's grave, although she did say that in the past Eddowes had tried to get her to cooperate and she had declined. Ms. Oswald also wouldn't say whether she believes the body in the grave is that of Lee Harvey Oswald. Mrs. Oswald said the claim by Eddowes' attorneys they had not been able to serve her with a subpoena is absolutely ridiculous. She said, "I've been home all along. All they had to do was call." District Court Judge James Wright has indicated it'll be at least next week before he decides whether to permit the exhumation or grant a temporary injunction against it. Bill Hicks, Channel 5.
We really can relax and say, now it's all over from that standpoint. That's really Lee Harvey Oswald in the grave.
Paul Grudy is the man who prepared Lee Harvey Oswald for the grave 18 years ago. It's Grudy who gave the body a hefty dose of embalming fluid, and he believes that dose may have helped after all.
They were able to find the body intact. They could see the length of the body. They could see the how it was arranged, how the hands were placed, and the rings on the certain finger, and all of this.
Grudy supervised the undoing of what he did in 1963. He inspected the Oswald vault and casket as they were lifted out of the ground yesterday, and then it was Grudy's job to put the body back.
to lift his remains from the original casket over into the container, which is a new metal casket, and then merely reload with a small amount of preparatory work. That's all that anyone could do in this case, and therefore he's exactly as he was in the first place.
But other things have changed drastically. The life of Marina Oswald Porter, for one. She says she has finally buried her dead husband for good. Confirmation of Oswald's identity certainly came as a surprise to this man, British author Michael Eddowes, who has published his theory that it was a Soviet imposter in the Oswald grave. It was Eddowes who started the push for an exhumation, and it was Robert Oswald who fought it as long as he could. His attorney says Robert Oswald finally gave up and gave in. There is one set of pictures of the entire procedure, the opening of the casket, the autopsy. There is even some videotape. All of it belongs to Marina Oswald Porter, and she insists she will burn the pictures so that they can never be published. Leah Keith, Channel 5 Action News. Marina Oswald Porter had finally won her battle to open her former husband's grave. Mrs. Porter watched from this car as the backhoe went to work. 6 feet of dirt had to be moved before workers could determine that the vault holding the Oswald casket had cracked. Moisture had seeped into the casket. So the body that was supposed to be so heavily embalmed that it was in near perfect condition turned out to be badly deteriorated. But skeletal remains were all that doctors needed, because specialists waiting for the body were waiting with dental x-rays taken from Oswald's military file. Under tight security, experts at Baylor Medical Center confirmed the identity of Lee Harvey Oswald. As one put it, identity confirmed beyond a doubt. And with that, the body was prepared for return to Fort Worth and a second burial, presumably the final burial of the accused presidential assassin. Leah Keith, Channel 5 Action News.
He died disgraced and disowned, so friendless that reporters were recruited to serve as pallbearers at his funeral. On that November day when he was buried, the conspiracy theories hadn't started. No one had yet suggested anyone but this young former Marine was the assassin who killed the president. But getting Oswald out of this plot was much more difficult than getting him in. And years later, the questions remained about who is buried in Oswald's tomb. It took the prestigious team of 4 pathologists 4 hours to reach their conclusion. The most convincing proof the body exhumed is that of Oswald's came with positive matching of dental records.
There is no way, in my opinion, that the antemortem records were faked, and of course the comparison speaks for itself.
Even the last mementos slipped into the casket by Oswald's wife Marina were found.
We removed both rings, which were subsequently identified as those put on at the time the casket had been closed 18 years ago.
Marina's attorneys told reporters their client was glad it was all finally over. Robert Oswald, brother of the accused assassin, had long fought the exhumation and didn't want the autopsy to ever take place. His attorneys say he was simply worn down.
His statement to me that he has a higher priority to his living family. I think it was causing a great deal of stress and strain and anguish on his present family.
Did Lee Harvey Oswald fire the fatal shots from the schoolbook depository? Was there a man on the grassy knoll? Was Oswald working for the Cubans or the Soviets or perhaps even another group? The Oswald remains don't answer those questions. But today, one assassination theory has apparently been put to rest. That doesn't stop the theorizing, though, by any means. Kevin Berger, Channel 5 Action News, Dallas.
Since November 22, 1963, most people believe Lee Harvey Oswald guilty of shooting President John Kennedy. But Oswald never got his day in court. He was killed by Jack Ruby. But this woman never had any doubt to Oswald's guilt or innocence. His mother, Marguerite, maintained from the day he was buried to the day that she died that Lee Harvey was innocent. And for the rest of her life, she tried to prove that. Her work has now been donated to the library here at TCU. More than 25 boxes of books, magazines, and newspapers were donated to the library at the request of Mrs. Oswald. Some of the books have a clear connection to the assassination, while others don't. And then there's her own story, which was written a few years ago. But many of the books have notations in the margin written by Mrs. Oswald, like this testimony from the Warren Report concerning Oswald's travels in Russia. Her response was, "Is this true? If so, think of the pressure." TCU is proud to have this collection.
I think it would be important for scholars investigating the period and all the facets of the assassination and its aftermath.
When the Oswald collection goes on display here at TCU's library, it will be the first time the public has had a really in-depth look at that side of the family as seen through the eyes of Marguerite Oswald. And maybe some of the information will be new light in the Kennedy assassination. Or maybe it will just be the reflections of a mother who never thought her son guilty. Dan White, Channel 5 Action News, TCU.
Just 2 days after he allegedly shot and killed President John Kennedy, Lee Harvey Oswald was gunned down in the basement of the Dallas City Jail, and his story with him.
He's been shot.
But his mother, Marguerite Oswald, decided to start her own crusade to clear his name. She worked on the project until she died in 1980. Now the results of her search are displayed as she had wished in the Mary Couts Burnett Library on the campus of Texas Christian University. If these students were alive at the time, they were very young. Too young to remember the circumstances surrounding that historic and shocking weekend in November 1963. Too young to remember with any detail the characters of that page of history. But students like Bruce Funk can appreciate the exhibit's historic value.
I have curiosity that a lot of people do of exactly what happened.
And for Alicia Marshall, the exhibit has a special significance.
His daughter was my roommate at UT, and that was quite a different experience. And I think it's, very important as to what happened in our past, because it was one of our precedents.
Mrs. Oswald never lived to see her son's name cleared, but her documentation, however biased, did provide us with another facet to a story that will never end. Randy Wiles, Channel 5 Action News, Fort Worth.
And there's the gunmetal gray limousine.
Ricky White was just 2 years old when assassins killed President John F. Kennedy in Dallas's Dealey Plaza. White says his father's diary, which he found in 1982, indicates Roscoe White may have fired the fatal shots.
And he was one of 3 men that did participating in the shooting of John F. Kennedy.
Ricky says his father was a Marine who knew Lee Harvey Oswald, that he worked for the CIA and used the code name Mandarin. Ricky says another agent, Lebanon, fired from the book depository. A second, named Saul, fired from the records building and hit Governor Connolly. His father fired from the grassy knoll. The so-called badgeman photo shows a man in a uniform and badge on the knoll. Ricky says it may have been his father.
The upper buildings fired first for the distraction of the people.
The fact is, Roscoe White was a professional assassin.
Some researchers investigating this theory say it's possible White killed the president, then later killed Dallas police officer J.D. Tippett investigating the case. They point to communiques that mention an assassin team called Rifle and information from Ricky's mother, who danced at Jack Ruby's club.